U.S. corn subsidies meant to steady farm incomes instead flooded the food supply with cheap sweetener, feedlot beef, and ethanol. This is Unintended Consequences, Episode 76. In the spring of 1984, executives at Coca-Cola quietly switched the formula for its flagship drink from cane sugar to high-fructose corn syrup. The change saved the company millions and spread within months to Pepsi and most other major brands. What began as a New Deal effort to keep corn farmers solvent had, by then, produced a river of low-cost corn that no one in 1933 had set out to create. The policy took shape during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. Franklin Roosevelt's Secretary of Agriculture, Henry Wallace, watched farm prices collapse and rural banks fail. The Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933 and the Commodity Credit Corporation that followed offered non-recourse loans and price supports so growers would not have to sell at harvest time lows. The explicit goal was income stability and a reliable domestic food supply, not abundance for its own sake. Wallace and his successors saw surplus as the lesser danger after years of scarcity and foreclosure. The approach treated corn as a strategic reserve crop whose steady production would buffer the wider economy. At the time, the arithmetic was straightforward. If loan rates covered production costs and allowed farmers to hold grain off the market until prices recovered, the cycle of foreclosure and rural bank runs would slow. Wallace's team understood that corn could be stored more easily than many other crops, making it a practical anchor for the entire price support system. Through the 1950s and 1960s, price support loans and acreage allotments kept corn prices above the cost of production in most years. The 1972 Russian grain sale and the 1973 Farm Bill shifted the emphasis. Agriculture Secretary Earl Butz replaced tight supply controls with direct payments that rewarded higher yields. Target prices and deficiency payments guaranteed farmers a return even when market prices fell. By the late 1970s, corn yields per acre had risen sharply and total production climbed. Early evaluations from the Department of Agriculture described the system as successful at raising farm receipts and expanding exports. The new payments worked by calculating the gap between a legislated target price and the lower market price. The government covered the difference on a per-bushel basis for eligible production. This removed the earlier incentive to limit acreage because farmers could now plant more and still receive the deficiency payment on every qualifying bushel. The same price signals that encouraged more corn also drove its real market price downward once output exceeded traditional uses. Wet milling capacity expanded in the Midwest, and by 1980, high-fructose corn syrup had become cheaper than imported sugar. Soft drink makers completed the switch by 1985. Estimates suggest high-fructose corn syrup captured roughly 40% of the U.S. sweetener market within a decade. Livestock feeders discovered that corn could be finished in confinement at lower cost than grass or smaller grains, accelerating the growth of large feedlots in Kansas, Nebraska, and Texas. The 2005 and 2007 Energy Acts added a new guaranteed buyer. Ethanol refineries whose mandates absorbed roughly 40% of the annual corn crop by the mid-2010s. Each downstream sector treated corn as an abundant, policy-stabilized input rather than a scarce commodity. Because the subsidy attached to the bushel rather than to any particular end use, processors and integrators captured much of the value while the original income support rationale remained intact. Public health researchers have documented rising per capita intake of caloric sweeteners and shifts in fatty acid profiles in the food supply, though the precise contribution of these changes to population weight trends remains contested in the literature. The causal chain ran from loan rates and deficiency payments to lower relative prices to capital investment in milling, feeding, and distillation infrastructure that proved difficult to reverse. Wet milling itself illustrates the mechanism. The process converts starch into glucose and then isomerizes part of it into fructose, requiring large-scale capital that only becomes economic when corn is reliably below a certain price threshold. Once those plants were built and amortized, the industry had a continuing interest in maintaining high corn throughput. Feedlots followed a parallel logic. Operators could buy corn below the cost of growing grass or buying hay, then market finished cattle at prices that reflected the subsidized grain rather than pasture costs. Ethanol mandates later locked in another fixed demand curve because blenders faced legal requirements to use set volumes regardless of corn price swings. Congress has revisited the structure in every farm bill since 1985, trimming target prices, introducing crop insurance subsidies, and adding conservation reserve provisions. Sugar import quotas and tariffs have kept domestic cane and beet prices higher than corn sweetener, preserving some market separation. Ethanol mandates have been adjusted but not repealed. Direct payments to corn producers were largely replaced by insurance and risk management programs in the 2014 and 2018 farm bills, yet total federal support for the sector remains substantial. No subsequent legislation has attempted to unwind the underlying yield incentives or to price corn at a level that would replicate pre-1970 scarcity. The system continues to deliver low-cost feedstock to the same industries that expanded under the earlier regime. Insurance-based support still pays indemnities when yields or prices fall below guaranteed levels, which preserves the incentive to plant more acres because the downside risk is partly socialized. When public policy guarantees returns on a single input, private capital migrates toward whatever can be made from that input at the new price. The original objective of stable farm income can be achieved while the composition of the entire downstream economy changes without legislative debate. Complex supply chains treat subsidized abundance as a permanent condition and build processing capacity accordingly. Before extending support to any commodity, it is worth asking which industries will be created or enlarged by the resulting price signal and whether those industries align with later public goals. Once those industries exist, reversing the original support becomes politically and economically harder because the new infrastructure depends on continued low input costs. Consider today's subsidies for critical minerals used in electric vehicle batteries and ask which new processing and manufacturing sectors might grow around that guaranteed supply. And that's where today's story leaves us. If it changed how you see one everyday decision, that's the whole point. Pass it along to someone who'd appreciate it, and we'll be back tomorrow with another case. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at NARA Network. Links in the show notes. One more thing, if you liked today's episode, our sister show, the Do Positive Pod, is worth a spot in your feed. Good news in science and tech, plus one concrete action you can take. It's one of the NARA Network's daily briefings, all free at naranetwork.com. And on the website, every episode's visuals live in our free image gallery at naranetwork.com/gallery. Royalty-free under Creative Commons. Download with attribution. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.